But first up on The Beat Goes On.
He's got a voice like solid gold and a twinkle in his eye. And keeping that eye firmly placed on our parliamentarian buddies is Tony Amos. We welcome Tony and the weekly political roundup.
Tony Amos. Wonderful to see you, Tony.
Jared, good to see you. Good to see you. The world is good.
What a great game, eh? We beat those Springbok.
We had to, didn't we, eh?
We had to beat
It had to happen. It had to happen, Jared.
Where were you, Tony? Were you shouting and jumping up and down and doing...
In the early hours, as you do, doing your own haka, enjoying the game, enjoying life, as we too. You know, ignoring all the other things that bring us grief and drama in the world and just get absorbed into a good game of rugby.
Yeah. We always start this part of the program, Tony, with the buzz.
Oh, yes, Jared.
Bet you've got a buzz.
An old adage or two, but with a modern twist.
Ooh.
That's the buzz this week. And it goes like this. Behind every successful man, there's a very surprised mother-in-law. Where there's smoke, there's probably a good time. And where there's a will, there's bound to be a family fight. That's the buzz.
Oh, it sounds very much like politics, doesn't it, Tony?
Oh, politics, Jared, yes. A weekly look at the oddballs and misfits, the gots and the twats, those asset strippers. Yes, the rooters and looters of public office we proudly call our politicians.
and the stripping continues, Tony.
It does. Stripping, asset stripping away credibility, stripping away the truth, all those scary things that happened around the political activity. The big issues this week, well, what has been the big issue this week? You know, not the economy, not the rising unemployment, not the debacle around the Christchurch rebuild, not the awful upset around education. No, again, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, the headlines are being dominated by the mishmash of Mr. And not particularly Mr. Kim.com himself, but the dreadful political and government agency activity around this case. And it's alarming. I mean, it's amusing, it's sad, it's pathetic, but it is really alarming, isn't it, eh? That no one really wants to be truthful and honest about it, except apparently Mr. .com. What's it about, Jared?
He's a fun-loving German looking for a good time.
He is a fun-loving German looking for a good time. And you can understand why those government agencies had difficulty finding him too, because he's such a wee fellow, you know, you just don't know where he might be. Eh? They forget they met this man. They couldn't remember seeing him. They don't remember being briefed about him. Crikey Dick, Mr. Key. You know, if that's the path he's taking, Jared, it's absolutely diabolical that we have a Prime Minister who behaves like that. Making up stories, making up facts, changing stories. He's got to go back to Parliament next week and change the records of Hansard. Now, that's terribly embarrassing, but it's also appalling for a Prime Minister to have to go down that path again. Not the first time he's done it, of course.
The answer lies in Hollywood.
The answer lies in Hollywood. Yes, well, where did Shonky Jonky go? He went to Hollywood. Yes, down in Hollywood. And why did he go to Hollywood? Well, there are two possible reasons he went to Hollywood. One is because he likes to hang out, clearly, with those who make things up and pretend about reality. The other one is he could be auditioning, of course, for a movie, couldn't he, eh? Yeah, and we've had some suggestions that he may well be there, Jared, to audition for a movie. And it's been suggested that the movie title could be one with a fairly topical sort of flavour at the moment.
I had heard it was going to be based on 50 Shades of Grey.
Yes, but not quite that title. Shifty Gays Are Laid, I understand, is the title of the movie he could be auditioning for. And what's the answer? Well, I'll tell you what the answer could be. An early election could clear the air. Now, these guys got the proverbial gonads to call an early election. I'd like to think so.
Well, we spoke of rugby at the beginning of the program, Tony. We talked about rugby, but a famous rugby man in Australia has made a few gaffes, hasn't he?
Oh, a few gaps. You're talking about Mr. Alan Jones. Well, maybe not Mr. Mr's a term of respect. Let's just call him Alan Jones. Yes, one time coach of the Wallaby rugby team. Then he became a coach of a rugby league team in Sydney, the Tigers. And now, of course, he's a radio host. This fellow was once upon a time a speechwriter for Liberal leaders in Australia. So he's got a political twinge about him. Never been a politician, but he has been making the news because Prime Minister Julia Gillard's dad died a couple of weeks earlier, about 3 weeks ago. And last week, Alan Jones came out and said, he was recorded saying it at a meeting, that Julia Gillard's father had died of shame because of all the lies she'd been telling.
That's going too far, isn't it?
Well, it's appalling, mate. It's just dreadful stuff. I mean, here's the Prime Minister. Like her or not, she's grieving the passing of her father.
Who she loved.
Dearly and respected dearly, and quite a remarkable fellow, I'm told, as well. Now, in politics, if you're a politician, you've got to cop it sometimes. People are going to have a go at you. But you don't have a go at politicians' families.
That's the line you don't
You
cross.
leave politicians' families alone. You can have a go at their associates, their colleagues, and sometimes even their friends, because they can all be tainted by the same brush. But you never have a go at politicians' families, and certainly when they're in a grieving process, you leave anyone alone for that private stuff called grieving. And that's important to all of us, and we all do it in a different way. But just remember about this fellow, Alan Jones. You know, when he was coach of the Wallabies rugby team, they were in England on a tour of England, and this same fellow was busted in a men's public lavatory soliciting for sex. Now, I don't want to dwell on that, but that's the type of fellow we're dealing with. Alan Jones, another classic Australian AP.
Good call, Tony, good call. And of course, let's place a good call to our friends in Wellington, the List MPs.
Oh, the List MPs. Aren't they wonderful, Gerard? The members of Parliament that nobody voted for. All the perks in the world, but no responsibility. For most of them anyway. But this story is not particularly about the List MP himself, but about a List MP's son.
Ooh.
Who was a student, a young man, and it was his first day at boarding school. And off he went. He was at boarding school and he was sat beside another young student who he had never met before, of course, and they got chatting. And the List MP's son said to his companion, he said, "What does your father do?" And the other young chap said, "Oh, my dad's a businessman." He said, "Oh, good." He said, "What does your dad do?" He said, "Oh, my dad's a politician. He's a List MP." And the other guy said, "Honest?" And he said, "Oh, no, just the usual sort." And that's politics.
Thank you, Tony.